So, listen, today I was feeling something really pronounced when I was driving. So I'm eager to for us to finally get this going today. Some things I definitely feel like the Lord is wanting to share on tonight in this time together. I'm going to share a little bit, and then we're going to get into prayer because I really feel uh, an urgency, a very strong pull just for praying, declaring some things. And so last week we were talking along the lines of working the word, and I hope you all remember that working the word. You know, ultimately what it boils down to is that we are ultimately we find the word and we put it into operation. You know, I believe the text that we used, and I don't have my notes from last week in front of me, but when the word says that, you know, we look in the mirror, you know, we look in the mirror, we see the manner of man that we are, and then we walk away having forgot what we saw. And ultimately, when we get into the word, what we're seeing is we're seeing the possibility. We're not only seeing the possibility, we're actually seeing what we're supposed to be. And so when you hear a preacher speak, oftentimes you're excited because you're hearing, you know, something that resonates within you. You're hearing a charge, something that is compelling you, calling you to be this person that God has called you to be. But then when you get away from it, you forget it. You forget what God was saying. You start to question if that word was for you. And so oftentimes we find ourselves vacillating between who God has said that we are versus what we know about ourselves. And so tonight we're going to continue along those same lines because I truly believe that I don't know if this is the message for the hour, but I will say that God has us specifically as a group in this vein right now. One of the things I shared last week is that when God gives a word, that word is an indicator that he is expecting a harvest from that word. And so when you start to hear something in a repetitive fashion, let that be an indicator that that's an invitation that God is wanting to do something in your life in that area. And so what we've been talking about rediscovering the lost you. We've been talking about identity. And so if you've been tracking with me over these last couple of weeks, we've gotten to the point now where we are starting to really have this conversation about our God nature. Okay. And I know that this is a weighty subject for some, you know, especially if you consider how a number of us have been introduced into the body of Christ as believers, as Christians. We rarely hear about what it means to be in the nature, in the image, in the likeness of God. Most of us, you know, to the extent of our teaching, you know, we're taught about tithing. We're taught about the makeup of a good Christian, you know, going to church on time, being a good person and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with these things. But the reality is that many of us are limited as it relates to what God is calling us to do and to be, because we have not come into a fuller understanding of what God is saying. One of the things, and I'll probably reference the discipleship group a few times because of what we've been discussing over these last couple of weeks. But one of the things we've talked about in discipleship class is Hebrews 6. And Hebrews 6 speaks of an elementary teaching. And then it says that we should move on to a more mature teaching, a more mature doctrine. And so the question is, if laying on of hands, you know, raising the dead, if these are elementary teachings, then what is the more mature teaching? Because the reality is that most of us get excited about the elementary things. You know, if you saw somebody who's dead come to life and come back alive, let's be honest, that is pretty much there's nothing that's going to top that, as far as your experiences. But God is saying that there's more. And I believe that the more is coming to an understanding of who he has called us to be. Once again, Romans 8, that has been my flagship biblical chapter for this whole year, because God is really speaking to me as it relates to who are these sons of God. And if we dive into what it means to be a son of God, it means to be the manifestation of who God has called us to be. And so once again, most of our hangups, if you think about it, most of our hangups that we experience in life has nothing to do with the devil. And I know that this is probably going to agitate a few people, but I promise you'll get over it. And at the end of the day, you still commanded to love me. I love you. So, hey, no hard feelings. But the reality is that most of our hangups have absolutely nothing to do with the devil. Most of our hangups are associated with our beliefs about ourselves, to be more specific. Proverbs 23 says that for as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And so a lot of the challenge as it relates to the topic of coming into who God has called us to be has nothing to do with the adversary, but everything to do with what we believe about ourselves. Now, could the adversary have sowed a seed at some point in our life to get us off track? Very possibly, more than likely. But the reality is that at some point in time, we have to confront these things within us that are keeping us from coming into an agreement with who God has said that we are. And I hope that makes sense thus far. And so when I'm talking to you about being like God, oftentimes it doesn't compute, because you remember every negative thing, every painful thing that has happened in your life. More specifically, you don't just remember the event, you remember how you responded. And so when you're hearing that God has made you like him, you're thinking to yourself, there's no way God would have responded the way that I did in that moment. And that point of separation right there keeps us from coming into an agreement with what God is saying. But like I said, the push for right now, the push for this season is we have to settle in on the reality that God has called us to be like him. We are like him. So what is keeping us from coming into an understanding of our God nature? All right. So the last thing I'll say before we get into our text, I know that this might sound like blasphemy. I get it. I'm a person who wrestled with this too. Like, ooh, I don't know, but for some reason, like I said, the Lord keeps bringing me back to this, and the reality is that I'm being disingenuous to the God who created me when I denied the nature that he made me to be. And I'll say that again. I'm being disingenuous to the God who created me when I deny who he has made me to be. That's almost like, and I believe everyone on here is a parent. That's almost like one of your children saying that I'm not your child. That no, I belong to somebody else, but not to you. And the reality is that oftentimes what we're doing is, when we fail to live into who God has called us to be, we're telling God that we're not his child. We're not his children. We don't belong to him. And so we're going to have to reconcile. We're going to have to settle on this truth. So tonight we're coming from Romans 8, and I know it feels like I was preaching already. And guess what? I was already in the vein. So Romans 8, we're going to read a few verses tonight. And it's my hope that we're going to bring it home, because there's something, like I said, the Lord is very insistent that I share on tonight. So I'm going to start from Romans 8, verse 26. I'm going to read to verse 31. And then after that, I'm going to jump over to John 14 and 12. OK, so that's Romans 8, 26 through 31. And then I'm going to read John 14 and verse 12. And so Romans 8, 26 says, likewise, the Spirit also helps in our weaknesses, for we do not know what we should pray for as we ought. but the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. Now he who searches the hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he makes intercession for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. For whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. Very important. I need you to highlight that. To be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, whom he predestined, these he also called. Whom he called, these he also justified. And whom he justified, these he also glorified. Verse 31. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? I'm going to jump right over to John 14 and 12. John 14 and 12 says, most assuredly I say to you, this is Jesus, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also. And greater works than these he will do, because I go to my Father. And so let's deal with that. Let's talk about all this on tonight. Let's get it done. Like I said, most of the time when you hear that you are made in the image and likeness of God, your mind immediately goes through everything that you've been through in life, everything that you possibly believe that will discredit you from being the person that God has called you to be. But here in this text, we know, one, that all things work together for the good of them who love God and are called according to his purpose. So we are looking for something to excuse us from being who God has called us to be. But what God was saying is that even that excuse, it can still work in my favor if you yield it to me. Okay. Now, the thing about it is that when we look at Jesus, oftentimes when we're talking about the miracles and stuff like that, we don't see ourselves as doing the miracles. Can I say this, that a miracle for you might not be the same degree of miracle for me? A miracle for you might be that you are the first person in your family to become a millionaire and everyone else around you is in poverty. That might be the miracle, because now you are getting ready to shift and change the dynamic of the rest of your family. A person who is wealthy, money is not a miracle to them. If I recall correctly, Steve Jobs, Steve Jobs was definitely a high millionaire. He may have well even been a billionaire. But Steve Jobs, who died of cancer, towards the end of his life, he was not looking for more money. He was looking for a cure. And so his miracle in that instance would have been something along the lines of health, something along the lines of recovering his wholeness. But the reality is that when we look at Jesus, he's saying greater works you shall do because I go to the Father. Now, let's be honest. Jesus had an understanding that whatever he said, it was going to be because he understood he was connected to the Father. My question to you all is, to what degree is your connection with the Father? Are you that confident that whatever you say is going to be a reality? Whatever you say, whatever you put your mind and your hands to doing, that is going to happen. That's a rhetorical question. I'll say for me that, sometimes I operate a lot more in the hoping stance, the happenstance, than I do to this degree of faith. I'll say something and I hope it happens, but there's still that residual I don't know. And oftentimes that residual I don't know discredits me from experiencing the harvest that could have been there if I fully tapped into what God was saying was for me. And I hope that makes sense, because what we're getting to, the point that ultimately I'm driving us to in these lessons is that we have to start seeing ourselves as Jesus in the text. To the same degree that Jesus was operating these miracles, to the same degree that Jesus was living out his ministry, we are getting the invitation to do it the same. Now here's the thing. With Jesus, he did it with intentionality. He intentionally went about doing it because, once again, his assurance was in his relationship. A lot of times what throws us off track is there's no assurance in the relationship. But imagine what things will look like if you could really rest in knowing that you belong to God and that he has you. Romans 8:38, there's a reason why I went to that particular verse. It says, what then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? What's keeping us from walking in that level of confidence in everything that we do? And this is not a rhetorical question. This is something we all have to ask ourselves, because the reality is that what the Lord has really been dealing with me about is a lot of the stuff that we are encountering really just boils down to decisions. Have you made a decision? Are you fully persuaded yet in who you are in God? Because that's what this all boils down to. Are you fully persuaded in his ability? It's kind of hard when I don't have the feedback, so I just gotta go. But here's the thing. What I was saying earlier is that the Lord was giving me some very specific instructions. Many of you all know that we're in the process of a church plant, stepping out, moving forward in ministry. And a couple years ago, I want to say maybe about 2-3 years ago, the Lord had given me a very clear vision of what the focus would be, in this new ministry. And for me, I was always thinking that it was on the basis of us being actually in the physical building. And so what the Lord said was, year one, you're going to focus on rediscovering the lost you. and what would you have it that, we've been talking about rediscovering the lost you since April. But subsequently, year two, the focus would be the year of application. And then he went on to say year three would be the year of acceleration, the year of expansion. Excuse me. Now, if you've been tracking, like I said, since April, we've been talking along the lines of rediscovering the lost you. And it seems like over the last month, we've been quickly getting to what I was expecting to be something that we finally hit on at the end of the year. But God has got us to that point. And my question is like, God, okay, you finally got us here. So what are you saying now? Well, he's saying that it's time to start applying. I'm not Jewish, but last Friday, I believe it was Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, the Jewish New Year. And, like I said, while I'm not a Jewish believer, I will acknowledge that it seems like around that same time frame, the Lord was, putting this emphasis that it is time to start applying what you've been hearing. And up until this point, like I said, we have been satisfied with what the author of Hebrews calls the elementary teachings. If we can lay hands, the sick recover, we're satisfied with that. But the question is, what is the deeper? And I truly, once again, believe that the deeper is the sons of God manifesting. Because here's the thing. People have been getting healed in our services for a long time, but the Bible does not say that the earth is moaning in expectation of that. It's saying that the earth is moaning in expectation for the appearance of the sons of God. And why is that? It's because we carry something that the world needs. But if you're still vacillating as it relates to who you are in God, then you're going to continue to miss out on what God is saying, what God is calling us to literally do here on the earth. A lot of the issues, a lot of the things that we've been praying about, it's not that God is holding them up. He's been waiting for us to come to a place of maturity where we can handle it. And so, like I said, it is a matter of decisions. Do we decide that we are going to be the people that God has called us to be? Are we still waiting on permission to be the people that God has called us to be? And here's the reality. If you've been waiting for permission, then let me be the first to say it. Go forth and be great. Because the reality is not only the world needs it, because I'm an inhabitant of the world, I need what you have. Because we're all in this work together. So what I was saying earlier is that the Lord was speaking to me very candidly earlier about what I'll call them are some prayer points, some declarations. I believe that I was hearing that not only in the area of mental health, but God was speaking to me about the assignment of premature death, whether it be by suicide, whether it be by accident, whether it even be by murder. And so right now we rebuke that spirit in the name of Jesus. We take full authority over that. No one will die of premature death. We will all live to realize our full potential. We will realize our purpose. We will walk in the manifestation of who God has called us to be. The second thing, somebody is dealing with the bondage of poverty. You've come into an agreement with it. That's why it won't shake you. It's not that God does not want you to be prosperous. You've come into an agreement that poverty is your portion. And we break that now in the name of Jesus. God has to resource you for your assignment, but you have to come into an agreement that he wants you to have it. And as you come into an agreement that he wants you to have it, it is now yours. So right now we break the bondage of poverty. Poverty is not our portion. The last thing I'll decree over this group is the spirit of boldness, courage. Right now we are in some dark times. If you watch the news, it's enough to drive you crazy. But at the end of the day, it still does not diminish our role and our responsibility. This is the time that we're called to rise up. So I declare a spirit of boldness. I thank you, God, for a spirit of boldness over this people. Your word declares that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. Let that be your decree. Let that be your mindset, that you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. We will not continue to shy away from what God has called us to be. The world is waiting for you to be. The world is waiting for you to do. And so what it all boils down to is a decision. The last petition I'll give out there, it might not necessarily be for anybody on this call, but it might be for somebody who's going to watch this video later. And it's the compel for salvation. Have you accepted Jesus Christ? And if you haven't, what's keeping you from doing it? You are literally, as I've been saying on this whole call, you're a decision away. Have you not accepted them because you're telling yourself you have to get to a certain caliber, a certain position in life, that you have to stop sinning before you can accept him? The Lord, he knows your condition. He'll deal with all of that in due time. But it's not for you to sit here and say, I have to do this first in order for me to get saved. No, that's a decision, a simple decision to say, Jesus, I accept you as my Lord and Savior. I accept your sacrifice. I thank you for dying for me. Forgive me for my sins. And it is literally that simple. But listen, y'all, I'll continue to keep reminding us that it is all about understanding your identity. But going forward, I truly believe that it's time to start talking about application. We have a lot of ground to take for the kingdom. And so if you're shying away, my responsibility now is to remind you of who you are. I have people on here who remind me of who I am constantly. They challenge me. And so and I'm the better for it. And so I want to say this is that while it might hurt a little bit, you will be the better for it. You'll be the better for it. The world will be the better for it. The people connected with you will be the better for it, because literally there are people depending upon you to be the change. You know, some of us have been praying for family members. Some of us have been seeing issues and concerns. And the reality is that God is asking, he's wanting you to be the one to lift them up. He's wanting you to be the one to be the usher to change in that situation. You know, we keep asking other people to intervene, but the reality is that if you see it, because the word talks about how, you know, Jesus, how he was disturbed because he saw the sheep scattered, you know, and they didn't have a shepherd. If you see the issue, you be the one to address it. You have the authority as a son of God. And once again, this is not gender exclusive. This is women and men and women. You have the authority and power. So walk in your authority and power. But that's all I have. Man, y'all about to have me go somewhere else tonight. But I'm gonna open up the floor. If anybody has any questions, any concerns, but like I said, going forward, it's about application, y'all.